All right, let's call to order the October 17th, 2016 meeting of the Operations Work Group. First item is public appearances, and I don't see any. Next is approval of minutes, and I move that we approve the minutes of the Operations Work Group meeting of September 19th, 2016.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Maya, advisory vote?
Aye.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That passes 5-0. Next up is our discussion item, 2016-17 budget / tax levy and 2017-18 budget.
All right. Can I go ahead and get it going on?
Please do.
So we have kind of a three-part agenda tonight. The first part is going to be all about wrapping up the 16-17 budget, and Mike will take the lead on updating you on that. And then the second part is related to the first part in that we want to talk about expenditures for 16-17 on TID 25, which will be included in the budget, and that's couched in our kind of larger proposal, but we really want to focus in on the 16-17 expenditure plan. And then the most important part of the meeting, at least from our perspective, is the launch of the next year's budget planning process. Here we are already planning for 17-18. And that will focus on establishing, or at least receiving initial round of feedback on goals, guiding principles, priority actions, and the calendar itself. So yeah, it'll be a fun night. And with that, I think we should just go ahead and dive right into part one. Mike, update on
Okay, so let's start with
16-17.
16-17. Before we get into 17-18, you know that we adopted a budget, a preliminary budget, back in June 27th. And that preliminary budget gets replaced ultimately with the fall budget and with the new data that comes in the fall. So there's always this October adjustment process. And tonight I'm just going to speak from some notes because the state equalization aid update, which is one of the key updates, was just published on Friday, just a couple days ago. So we're going to present a report to the board next Monday night. And what I'd like to do now is just sort of highlight a few of the key items that that we've learned for this fall. So we've been through this process before. Adjustments in the fall can be large or small. In this case, they're fairly small. They can be positive or they can be negative. In this case, they're generally positive. So so let's talk a little bit about them. And before I do that, I just want to sort of remind myself and others that the 2016-17 budget process that we worked on all fall was quite a challenge. As you know, we had minimal revenue growth available to us. We had to reduce 64 positions in the budget, preliminary budget, and we did a lot of work around healthcare, and it was a challenge all the way through. And I don't want to lose sight of that. So the adjustments that we're going to talk about are really in the context of what was overall a difficult budget. So the first piece of news is from Friday, which has to do with state equalization aid, which is our second largest source of revenue, taxes being the first, equalization aid being the second. As you know from past years, it can be tricky, can be a little bit volatile. We took a really defensive stand on this in the original budget. We said it was going to go down 9%. And then we updated that in the June budget, or excuse me, with the July 1 state aid estimate. And then ultimately there was an October 15th, or in this case 14th, update. And that number was $820,000 higher than we were anticipating. Now, that doesn't mean that we have $820,000 available to us. It means that this inverse relationship between property taxes and state aid will result in slightly lower tax rate estimate. We were really concerned about that because we put material out in the public related to the referendum to exceed operating limits. where we said that if the referendum to exceed were approved by the community, and if the board then exercised the full $5 million of levy authority associated with that, that the tax impact on the community would be, the tax levy would go up no more than 2.17%. And it was really important that hold. So with the final adjustments that we've made, we've updated that number to 2.11%. So I feel like that was the number one accomplishment, or number one thing we were looking for on Friday, was to make sure that we were right on that number. So 2.11% is the maximum tax levy update, maximum tax levy increase with $5 million of revenue authority included. Without the $5 million, the levy is nearly flat. Okay. So that was good news on Friday. But again, good news within the context of an overall difficult budget. The enrollment estimate came in on Friday. We've had this information for a little while now. Incredibly important assumption in the budget. It drives the revenue side of the budget, and it drives staffing, which drives expenditures. So Andrew Statt's team, the research and data use team, produces the estimate of enrollment. Their prediction was that our resident headcount, would decrease by 155 students. And it decreased by 156. So they were wrong, as I have reminded him, by one student. But that means we staffed correctly in the spring. I mean, we staffed to the right number of pupils. So that was very important. The open enrollment numbers were favorable. Open enrollment is also somewhat difficult to predict. But as we wrote in the memo, if you just net the ins and outs on open enrollment, it would improve by 73 students over last year's actual. That's very favorable for us. We also had to make an estimate of tax base growth for the community. We used 3.50, came in at 3.51. So we were very happy with that number as well. So, yes.
Open enrollment was net
Positive.
73, and total was a net 156. So that 73 is included in 156.
So, in a way, yes. The revenue limit count, the big one, the 156 student, is purely resident count. Purely resident. And when we do that count, we exclude students who attend here from elsewhere. If you're here from Sun Prairie, we cannot count you. If you are our student and you are attending Sun Prairie, I'm just using them as an example, we do count you. It's a resident count without regard to where the student attends. Right? It's a resident count. And in that regard, we were very accurate. Yes.
Just residents attending public schools.
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
that's just slight clarification.
That's right. So, and then on the open enrollment piece, we do a separate calculation. The students who are our residents who are attending elsewhere are already included in that base count that I gave you. And then we get to add revenue for those students who are coming in from elsewhere. So there's two adjustments that happen there. And so in both cases, we were pleased with the outcome.
Mike, what were we projecting on open enrollment?
We took a negative stance. We predicted, I believe, a net 30 negative. And it turned out to be about a 73 positive.
Wow, so that's...
Yeah, that was a significant number. And we've had that go both ways in the fall. It's very hard to call.
And just as a reminder to the board, we will have a full enrollment report for you in November with all the details on open enrollment as well.
I have one more question about the enrollment numbers, about the third Friday, that probably will be answered in the October one. But the breakdown between elementary, middle, and high school, how were the projections on that? What's that? That'll be in the October report?
That's
Okay.
Yeah, we were just looking at aggregate
Okay,
totals.
you're worried about the budget piece.
Yeah, Andrew's on the details for November.
Yeah, so that's a lot of information. Overall, equalization rate was good, enrollment was good, open enrollment was good, the tax base estimate was good, and therefore the fall adjustment is going to be, it should be a relatively straightforward exercise, which is nice. I hate to have to deal with these things in the fall when they're not as predicted. So a lot of different departments were involved in that work, and thanks to all of them for their accuracy.
Mike, before we move on to TID 25, do you want to make a statement or two about the fact that enrollment came in different? I mean, we have one dynamic that will bring down the tax levy incrementally, but we do have now a little bit of breathing room in the budget that we didn't have before, and what we're going to do with that. I think that's important to wrap up.
Yeah.
Here.
So there's a couple of things that will be helpful in wrapping up this budget.
Yeah.
The first would be the swing in open enrollment, which actually creates an opportunity for us. And then the second would be the estimate that we used on 4K provider sites.
Right.
And the team is still working on this, but essentially it's going to come down to, I think, two strategies that we'll recommend for Monday night. One would be to identify any areas in the budget that need to be shored up. And we always struggle with a couple. These are perennials. Substitute, cost of substitute teachers,
Yeah.
and utilities. We're going to take a look at those and see if they require a budget adjustment. And then remember that this budget is set to be $1.6 million negative as part of a 2-year strategy. The 15-16 budget was 1.6 million positive, and this one, its successor, is 1.6 million negative. So I think the other thing we might recommend is that I think we're in a position to improve that forecast, and it might come in at 1.5, 1.4, maybe even $1.3 million
Yeah.
negative, as opposed to 1.6.
So what aspect of utilities would be volatile? I would think that utilities would be moving in a positive direction.
It's really just the rate issues. We've had good experience on natural gas lately, and we're buying natural gas future about 5 years out, but not all of it 5 years out, and some we buy more spot market. We've done well there. It's not natural gas; it's electricity. We've been over budget, not hugely, but somewhat over the last couple of years. And again, I just want the team to have one last look at that, because those are volume issues. They're not like salary where it's just locked in for the
Right.
year.
And we want the budget to come in balanced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, you said the budget was projected to be 1.6 million negative. But if the referendum passes, that would make it, what, 3.4
It would make it
million
3.4 million
positive?
positive. That's right.
I have a logistical question about that. Will we pass two levies in October?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
a great logistical
So-
question.
And
Mhm.
so, I mean, is that the proper procedure?
So there are
It is, yeah.
every year. Yes. Quick answer is yes, and it's because by statute, school districts must adopt a levy by November 1.
Right.
And there are always a lot of school bond referendums on the November 7, 8, 9, 10 election cycle. So the DPI came up with this fix, where they essentially say, pass it either way, and then whichever one is approved is the one that you certify. Does that make sense?
Yes. So when we're talking about the adjustments around open enrollment and related things, the adjustments would be in relation to the adjustments around the referendum also. I mean, that is, so they would be folded into there. assuming a past referendum as Ed did, which is a dangerous assumption, but,
Right, we don't want to go
Okay.
too far there, but all of those, what are currently sort of variables, become locked into a budget, and we would have a budget that incorporates a successful referendum. We have a budget that does not. And we have a tax levy that does,
incorporates.
and a tax levy that does not. And that's really the only way to approach it. Yes, so.
but, yeah, I
So-
get it.
Yes, well, Dylan's
I
gonna
think I
have-
understand it.
Dylan will
It's-
be managing that on the stage Monday night.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Can I follow up? So, the open enrollment numbers coming in like about 100 students better than we had projected would mean that we would get an extra $600,000 or something in revenue. That doesn't change the budget necessarily. It just means that we would increase the surplus that much. Or we could change the budget, but it doesn't automatically change the budget, right?
That's right. It would, for open enrollment, it would, sorry, it's distracting. So, the bottom line on it is that, we would see that $1.6 million negative number improve just because of the internal dynamics of open enrollment in 4K, and then potentially improve substantially because of the referendum. And then that hopefully will set us up for getting through the next few years. Yeah. So yeah, there's kind of two major things going on at the same time.
I'm not sure I understand the question. So what do you mean when you say it doesn't improve the budget? I mean, you have an additional several $100,000, so what, I mean, that is a budget impact. So what do you mean here when you say it doesn't improve the budget?
Well, what I meant was that we already authorized the level of spendings we're approving. And so the fact that we get more income doesn't necessarily mean we're gonna spend more unless we decide we're going to.
Right. Right.
Which is why the team, we're just flagging for you, is looking at whether or not there are any places that actually do need to be shored up,
Right.
right? Because if that's the case, we want you to see that in October when you approve the final budget.
And I just, my question earlier about the,
looking at whether or not there are any places that actually fill it up.
it's an echo.
Feedback.
If that's the case, we don't see how
It's an echo.
Wow.
My question about,
Michael, you still there? Michael?
Yeah, I'm still there. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I'm on
You
the delay,
imitated Jen
but
really
Jen
well.
answered my question.
do you have a question, Mike? Mike, do you have a question? Then I'll ask, I'll just say,
Good to go, Mike?
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you, Jen.
sorry.
my question about the enrollment projections versus the actuals with the unevenness kind of speaks to, are there places where we do need to?
Jen had answered.
Where we do need to make adjustments on the spending side. That if, that if we have, if X school has an extra 40 students, that's a place where we do need to change our budgeting, and may not have the flexibility to do it within the budget we passed in June. And that was kind of what was behind that question, so,
Okay.
that kind
So,
of detailed thing.
So I think it might be worth spending a minute on that.
Yeah.
Because, first, our approach is to make only those adjustments that are necessary based on the new state aid information. We're not trying to, have a second budget process. So then the second thing is, if there are any things that are just glaringly obvious that need to be fixed, and I mentioned a couple of typical examples, we would address those. But as to a particular school, having, say, an enrollment swing of 40 students, that has already been dealt with through our use of unallocated FTE. And that pattern has already been settled down. And we have, at this point, still a handful of unallocated FTE to deploy during the rest of the school year if we need to. But that's all been worked out. Yeah.
Dean?
Yeah, Michael,
Yeah.
um, TJ's point was interesting, is, that, there's 100 more students that we didn't count on. Now, they're not gonna, our 50 schools aren't each gonna get 2 extra kids, they're gonna cluster. Do we know where they'll be? And will that, and as TJ mentioned, will we need another teacher here or there? It's
Dean,
100
yeah.
100 more students.
I think what Mike is saying is that we already account for that. I mean, that's why we so closely track
Okay.
enrollment from before school year even starts all the way up till third Friday. We're already making those adjustments all through those first weeks of schools. That is already accounted
Yeah.
for
Mhm.
in the budget. Yeah.
So, have we ever had a situation where we don't have enough unallocated? I mean, that enrollment, is that a possibility?
pretty tight these
last So that few years, have we- but
I don't know that we've not had it.
That we,
Not
that we,
recently.
I don't think recently, we've been pretty diligent about monitoring the numbers. Years ago, we might have moved teacher from school to school if we wouldn't have had unallocated, but we
I
really
see.
tried
So
to
that's a
not do
solution.
that, and really staffed, I think, in a more systematic way
Mhm.
this year in order to make better placements of teachers across the district.
so, okay, so that's a solution, I see.
So, yeah, an accurate enrollment forecast is incredibly important, and having the discipline to hold back 10 or 12 unallocated positions is the other piece of that. If you do those two things, the adjustments in September should be minor, and they were this year.
Okay, on to
Right.
25.
Oh, to 25. all
Yeah,
right.
so we'd love for you to move to the memo in your packet. We're basically going to work off of this to do a quick update on 225. So Michael, get us started, and
Okay.
this is kind of the last piece of the 16-17 budget.
Yeah, that's
Actually.
right. This is on the agenda tonight because it's very much related to 16-17. And this will be included in some form in the item that gets voted on next Monday night on the 24th.
Yep.
So this is the promissory note related to our transaction with the city and TID 25 in the city. This was previewed at the board level back in July. So the basics of the issue are that we have a $9.27 million promissory note that we have issued to the city, and we can draw upon that note. And our plan is to draw upon it in 4 or maybe 5 roughly equal installments over the next 4 or 5 years. The principal to repay this promissory note will come not from our operating budget. It will come from the future TID surplus in TID 25. And the city was confident enough in that forecast to guarantee that for us. So that means that we can allocate these resources to support the schools and not have to worry about budgeting $9.27 million to repay the note. So I think that's all been established.
Yep.
So now we have arrived at the point where we can begin to put this idea and these resources to real use in the school district this year. So this is our plan for how to deal with this opportunity, $9.27 million. And I should say before I walk through the guiding principles that as great as this was a wonderful opportunity, and congratulations to the people who engineered this agreement. This is $9.27 million over 4 or 5 years, maybe roughly $2 million a year. And that's great. It can help make a difference. It is not in any way a substitute for or anywhere near the equivalent of our operating budget at $350 million a year. So in our internal discussions, we tried to not put too much pressure on this money or rely too heavily on it. The regular operating budget still has to carry the burden of the load here. So as to this $9.27 million, we came up with 8 guiding principles to help our team and I suppose future teams a few years down the road to decide how to manage this. So here are our guiding principles. Invest in actions which will make a difference. So that's why you don't see something like the electric bill on here. Make a difference. This is a special opportunity. Let's take advantage of it. Spread the spending over 5 years, 4 to 5 years, realistically, because as you probably know, anytime we have a spike in our cost per student, which this spending would do, we end up getting less state aid in the subsequent year. So we want to manage that. Needs will change. We do not have a 5-year crystal ball for the organization. So needs will change, and under this structure, we can consider this issue every October, and as an annual draw, an annual opportunity to recalibrate, reprioritize, rethink how to best use these funds. Number 4, since we're doing with this in kind of an annual draw format, the action that is immediate is next Monday night to approve the 16-17 portion of this overall plan. Not looking for a blanket approval for the whole thing, just the 16-17 portion. Couple more. Avoid recurring obligations for obvious reasons. These funds will run out. It's a one-time source of funds. On facility improvements, look for high return on investment type of issues or opportunities. And lastly, account for the interest expense associated with this note within the plan itself so it doesn't become a burden on the operating budget in general. So with those guiding principles, we started to get to work.
That's right. And as you'll remember, in July, we met with you all to share with you our thinking about best use of these funds. We used that feedback that led to these 6 general categories of spending. And to Mike's earlier point, we wanted to kind of project out over 5 years to get a sense of maybe where we would spend that money. But what's most important, we think, are the categories. At this point, and the expenditures for the 16-17 year. The categories we think all align really well to those guiding principles. The first one focuses on high leverage planning and design. We think that it's a great use of one-time funds in areas of high need where we've got challenges that are maybe a bit beyond our current capacity to solve. It's a great use of one-time funds to bring in that additional support to help us to better understand those problems and devise better solutions. That is in areas for us, we think, like potentially the future of 4K, middle school design, alternative schools, and you can see those in the grid on the next page. The second area that we identified was focus on maintenance projects. As you know, this is an area of our budget that has been unfortunately sorely underfunded for years, and we think this is a place where we can actually accelerate our work and get some of those projects off the list. And that includes things like playground replacement, athletic equipment replacement, the work that we want to do on all gender restrooms and locker rooms, just as some examples. And again, you can see our best thinking on the next page. We included a section on opportunities for innovation. At this point, this is more of just a placeholder. There's no expenditure for the 16-17 year in this category, kind of allowing us some time to work with you to think about what are those emerging opportunities for innovation that would help to really propel our performance for the students who need it most. We have a category in here on technology infrastructure and acceleration of technology integration. Again, we think this is a great use of the funds. As you know, our facilities referendum funding does currently include some tech infrastructure, but that goes away. And this would be a way to extend our work on technology infrastructure after that funding is gone, and then potentially to accelerate implementation of our tech plan, which, as you know, we had to slow down a couple of years ago because of budget challenges. And then last but not least, we included a couple of sections for reserve for future needs, the things that we just couldn't possibly be on our radar right now. This was important feedback that we got from the board in July, as well as a reserve for interest expense, which was also feedback that we received from the board in July. Again, we think it really aligns well with the guiding principles. So we'd love feedback on the general areas, but the most important part for the sake of the vote you'll have on Monday is what's in the 16-17 column. So if we could flip over to the back, Mike and Lisa are going to just highlight what is in the expenditure column for this year.
So I'm going to start in 16-17 in the category around planning and design, and look at that placeholder there around development, redesign of secondary alternative schools. And that proposed amount is really about supporting Karen Stocks Glover and her team, so that they can actually do the day-to-day work of educating kids in the school while getting some help around the vision, the design, and implementation over the next 3 years. So it's about supporting them moving forward and also allowing them to do the day-to-day work that happens in their
As you
building.
guys will remember, the alternatives group did an analysis and presented the board a set of recommendations for changes they'd like to make. So this is really about supporting them and actually getting to implement
Yep.
a design that meets those recommendations.
And that's the only one in that first category that would occur in 16-17.
Yep.
Second category is maintenance projects and facility improvements. These lend themselves well to this type of funding source because they're not recurring. And I'll go through them quickly. The first is to restore a $300,000 cut that we made during the budget process. We had increased funding in general maintenance, capital maintenance, from $4.5 million to $5 million, and we felt good about that. Then we had a $300,000 problem that we wanted to fix. We were trying to fix this negative net pay related to benefits,
Yeah.
and we didn't know where to take it from. So we took it from maintenance because we knew that this TID note was out there and that this could be a possible way to fix that problem. So here it is. That's $300,000, and that would happen immediately. But again, it's one time. Accelerate priority items on the facility maintenance list, $500,000, primarily roofs. We have a significant backlog in roof replacements. Jen mentioned playground replacements. This is an attempt by us to fill in the gap between those schools, primarily elementary schools, where their own PTOs can raise enough funds to have a great playground, and then other schools where the PTO or any other external funding isn't quite as strong. This way we can step in and address that.
Mike, how much does the playground cost? How many can you get for $150,000?
So the total's $150 a year. But that's like asking how much does a car cost. $150,000 would, how do I say this? It doesn't go as far as you would think. Maybe $200,000 for a single playground. If it's completely, because the fall zones, we all played on, playgrounds have changed. And more than half the cost is in the fall zone. But what this does is allow us to address the most urgent and needy of these situations. And every school has at least a little bit of funding capacity. And in combination, we think we can make something good here happen here, and create an appetite for maintaining that higher standard across the district.
Playgrounds are kind of a hot button issue, and especially around the equity issues around playgrounds. And I think it's great that we're going to try and address this in this way. I think we should talk seriously about adopting a process or a policy around how we do this, because it is a hot button issue and if I'm at X school that worked 4 years to raise money to replace 2 pieces, and then suddenly Y school is getting everything from this funding, I'm not going to be happy. And so I think that we need to have it be kind of a public, transparent process done in a certain way. That minimum 10% local funding. You just kind of put a set of rules out there. So yeah, I definitely support this. I think it's great. I think it's something we
Yeah.
should have done a long time ago, but we have to, let's do this carefully.
Understood.
Quick question, how bad could we make this happen, Mike?
Oh, well, under, I'll take my answer off the air. Yeah,
Yeah, let's wait till,
So
see if
the
we can
idea-
get them back so we can hear the answer.
this would be plan it in winter and execute it in spring, summer. Which is typical for playground work, typically happens after the school year is over with. For obvious reasons. Okay.
I do have a question. Do you want me to wait till after?
Let's see if we can get,
Well, no, it's related to the maintenance of facilities, but I can wait till you get to the list. Emergency.
Okay, I'll go quickly. So reserve for renovating instructional spaces is not on the 16-17 agenda, but that will emerge. We've got a year to plan for those needs. The all-gender restrooms, this is something to get started. I mean, we need a standard, and we need to design to that standard, and then we need to start acting on it. But this is, for us, a show that we take an action that shows that we take these issues seriously. We recognize that we have a deficit here, and we want to start making improvements. Athletic equipment replacement was a board-suggested item. The athletics budgets tend to cover routine operational stuff like supplies and travel and coaches' pay, but does not cover that next higher level of equipment, whether it's a backboard or wrestling mat, you name it. It's an identified deficit area for us. And lastly, the Doyle HR outer office and restrooms, which is kind of the public face of this building, especially for recruiting and selection of staff. And it's an area that is in dire need of a facelift.
James?
Yeah, for major high schools, the gymnasiums, the wood floors, and we do have a number of, even middle and elementary schools with wood floors. What's typically these floors are resurfaced a lot of places annually to keep them, because the wood lasts forever if you take care of it. What's the schedule, maintenance schedule for our wood floors? Because they're heavily used, even MSCR uses them a lot of outside, a lot of activity.
Mm-hmm.
So do we have a maintenance schedule? Do we resurface them once a year? What's the schedule there?
Yeah, they're usually resealed. They are resealed every year, and then every multiple years they're sanded all the way down and completely redone.
How often do we do the resanding?
That's been a while, so they get stripped and resealed every year. The last basketball court, we're just
Hello.
getting into this
You
right
might be
now
right
for
back.
the long-range facilities work. The last basketball court done in the district was Memorial, and I think that was 7-8 years ago.
Yeah.
And that was a complete strip
That was
and
stripped,
Sand.
sanded, repainted.
7-8 years ago.
So it's gonna get done, I'm gonna do one this summer. And then we wanna get, like every 2 or 3 years, we do a court district-wide, at least our spec shows.
So what's the cost of, I would imagine, what's the cost of the sanding and resurfacing?
You got a price on it, I think it was $40,000.
So 40,000, so 160. Annually, 160.
do you have an approximate breakdown on the Doyle building, reception area versus public restrooms?
I don't, but I can get that for you.
Okay. Because when I first saw that, I was like $240,000 to renovate a reception area. I went, and so
Nice.
I'd kind of like to get a feel for that. It was like I can see a renovation, but
Yeah.
and then I saw that the restrooms are in there and plumbing can cost money.
Yes. Yes.
That's the little kid stalls, yeah, where you can actually see each other over.
So
Yeah, just put it out there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the most welcoming space for our new employees.
Let's go through the last couple sections, guys. Tech infrastructure. Do you want to do that, Mike? 16,
Innovation
17.
opportunities, we will
we're just focusing on 16, 17,
Thank you.
I
Okay,
thought.
so, thank you, I apologize. So, technology infrastructure, there are two items that we want to move on quickly. The first is extending the fiber backbone to the final 6 schools, which are currently on the telecom lines. This is an absolute no-brainer, because we can then discontinue the expensive telecom lines. So we should do that right away. And then the other is begin migrating to cloud-based systems for website and IC. We host a lot of things here on our own servers, and this is both a way to keep our systems more up-to-date and to prevent outages, especially in our major systems like our web and IC. And that comes with a strong recommendation by the IT department itself.
What does that change on the annual operating expenses in the future if we move to web-based?
Yeah, so there's cost savings and there's
Right,
cost
right.
increase.
That's what I was.
Yeah.
What's it? Do we know what it
We were
nets
using
out?
a kind of a rule of thumb that to move the website would have a net cost increase of about $75,000 a year annually, but with much greater functionality, reliability, and speed, we believe, and something probably similar for IC as well.
So it'll be a net increase in costs, but there'll be some efficiencies that come with it, and then these are one-time expenses, which are different than that. And also, and that net would mean that would we be looking at, I guess that we have, in general, we have increased technology staffing needs, period. Would we be shifting personnel from one place to another?
Most likely, and you could start arguing that, we won't have as much demand, but
That's what
we need
I was
an
wondering if that
overall
argument would come
assessment
up, and
before we would
that's
make a
why I was
decision like
asking.
that. We're not ready to make personnel decisions at this point. But, we do recognize that migrating to cloud-based systems is key for us.
Are there any other questions or feedback on the TID 25 proposal, given that you'll be asked to vote for the 16-17 expenditures as part of the 16-17 budget on Monday?
Oh, I'm sorry, TJ?
I've got kind of two big picture comments. The 16-17 stuff looks fine in general, and I don't see any objections coming up. Like I said, like a little more information around a couple of them, like the Doyle renovation. It's when I start talking that he just hangs up. That's it. It says on the first page. It says something about that these will be considered, annually in October. I'd like to see these integrated more into the budget process along. I don't like getting these in October to look at it, and under these short timelines. I think that this becomes part of the budget picture for the next few years, and that it can be a separate chapter in the budget book, or it can be whatever. But this interacts. Things like the maintenance, as Mike pointed out, that we needed the $300,000. So I'd like to have this process for this be integrated into the regular budget process in future years. This year's, there's good reasons why it's been done this way. And the second is that in terms of, I look at category A, there is a lot of consultant spending there. And I think in general we have to be careful about doing consultant spending, but as a philosophical thing, to the extent possible, you talked about doing things with alternatives. If we can find ways to build in, to build capacity of our own people via release time and things like that to do some of this work and as much of it as possible. There's things like the evaluation of 4K. Certainly doing an outside person for that is a no-brainer. But there's other places where we're trying to develop programs within the context of our own cultures and our own schools. And yes, an outside eye can help, but I also think that our people you can look at what's happened with our alternatives, and Karen's done, they're working on a vision and things like that, and I think Jen used the language described that they need the time when they're not teaching students. Well, I'd like to see if we could do as much of that with some kind of release time thing, as opposed to bringing in somebody from outside. It's just a general philosophy for all these, the middle school redesign, whatever else, the budgets. Well, the budget people don't get release time. That doesn't count for budget people, does it? But so as a philosophical thing on those, that's I'd like to see us try to do as much of that as possible.
Mike, I have a
Yeah.
question about the accelerate priority items on the facility maintenance list. And I see over 4 years, it goes 500,000, 150, 500, 150. And I'm just wondering where
What's
those
that all
numbers...
about?
Yeah, what's
Right.
that all about?
That's what you can.
Yeah, if, I see the point. We were using that line as, to balance.
Whatever's left?
Yes, to get down to the, so the bottom line would work out. And we felt that other items had a certain urgency about them, so we were using it as the plan around account, if I can put it that way.
Okay. Anyone else? Oh, my.
I was just wondering if more money was needed for facilities maintenance, because within my high school, like since the first couple of weeks since school started, like we've already encountered a few issues, and they have disrupted classrooms, and like they keep persisting, disrupting like the same cohort of classrooms. So I was just wondering like if we needed more money for that process. Like to provide an example, like initially our ceiling tiles were removed because there was like mold in the building, so we had to be like displaced from our classrooms. Which wasn't super helpful because my teacher couldn't even get into the room to get her classroom materials, so she didn't have the lesson materials, so she was unprepared, and we basically had a study hall, which wasn't super great because that occurred for 2 days. And then later, we had tiles with some harmful substance in them, so we had to be removed from the classroom again and placed somewhere else. And then right now, in the classrooms behind us, something is also happening with the ceiling. There are chainsaws and people working during the day, which is great. I mean, it means things are happening. But it's disruptive because when we're trying to take a test or like write a timed essay, we're only hearing chainsaws when we're trying to focus.
Oh, good Lord. Well, you are the ultimate customer, you and your other, your fellow students. So we take your inputs seriously. And I'm glad that you mentioned it. We acknowledge that we need more money in this area. There was a study done by the board and others about 5-6 years ago now that said we need to be budgeting about $8 million a year to maintain these buildings, and we're just a little over $4.5 million per year, and it takes a toll on these facilities. We know from the report that the board saw from the Vanderwald study that we project that we're going to need every one of our existing schools going forward. So. We have an obligation to maintain them. As to these specific issues, I'm glad that Mr. Weezy's here, and he's
well aware of it.
And as for the allocation in this project, yes, we would love to put more money into maintenance. We were trying to balance addressing multiple things. This was the ultimate allocation we came up with.
Just in response to that, like when I was talking to my fellow classmates, we thought it was more important that like instead of, for example, like we agree that the tech plan is really important, like, and it's really, since we were behind in it and we want to be on par with the other schools that are advancing their students using one-to-one technology, we should get to that point. But like we thought it was more crucial at this time that we focused on addressing the issues that have been pressing our schools for a long time, since we have the funds, instead of investing in something that our district hasn't really moved towards yet.
Dean?
Yeah, Mike, just, when you mentioned that utility costs and particularly electricity is one of the variables that we don't really know every year. I'm just wondering if we could begin to explore a little bit more on seeing if we can arrange some solar panel on our properties. We have so many flat buildings with no tree cover that moving to, now they're expensive to install, but if we own them, the saving on the electricity would be enormous. So I really think we need to start thinking and looking that way. I know MG&E has a program. You all know I run a housing program. I've worked to deal with a program that are installing them for free, and then I pay them at a reduced rate. and eventually I can buy them up where I get the full benefit, then they cover almost the entire roof, so it extends the life of the roofs dramatically, 10 to 15 years. So there's long-term costs here, and I don't know what 3 and 4 years out, another 650,000.
Mm-hmm.
We might be able to find something by then, and if we can work deals where the installation is free, we pay them at a reduced cost, and eventually buy them out and get the whole deal.
Right.
It's significant money.
Right.
So many of our schools have no tree cover, so get the full benefit of the whole year. And then particularly in the summer, you sell it back to them, all the surplus.
Right.
So I think that this community particularly would be extremely supportive of that. And I think we have to seriously look at that this time around. I know there's been some hesitation and reluctance on some efforts, but I think we really got to take a look at this stuff.
I think Chad and I would agree with that, but we're very interested in it. It's difficult in that a lot of the incentives for solar are in the form of tax credits, but since we don't pay taxes,
Maybe we can get
so you
some
have to try to
investors.
find a third party to work around it.
Yeah.
But we're interested in it and we're
Programs that
exploring
can
it.
do it that way.
Yeah.
And that's who I'm
Yeah.
working with.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned it.
I think we can. We will be ready to vote on these items for 1617 on Monday. And now we're shifting to 1718.
All right. 17, 18,
Which
let's
year
do
are we
it. You guys ready?
Okay, so we're covering 3 years in one meeting here, I think. Jen, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it.
Yeah, go for it.
So, the purpose of presenting this material in 1718 is really for around three key takeaways, what we're trying to get. We want to preview the budget goals and the budget guiding principles and get your reaction to those and your input on those. They're important. They guide everything that follows. That's why they come first. And then provide an opportunity to get into the strategic priority action discussion. And but from kind of open discussion as opposed to, really scripted. So, and then we also want to take a look at the calendar, the big level budget calendar, and talk a little bit why we're doing this work so early. Okay, so that's what we're trying to get at. This is this is a familiar slide. We've used this before. These are the elements of the budget development cycle. These are fairly consistent year to year. You can see goals and principles come first. Revenue forecast is always very early in the process. We have 3 unknowns on the revenue forecast. We have the referendum on revenue limits in November. We have the state budget in the spring or late spring. And we have the enrollment forecast. So those 3. But we can't wait. We have to make reasonable assumptions and budget around them, and that's what we will do. And you can see priority actions early in the process as well, and Lisa's going to talk about that a lot later in this presentation. One other thing I want to note about the change in emphasis, we'll talk about this in calendar a little bit, is that we'd like to move earlier on a set of options and recommendations for the board around compensation, both in the salary and the employee benefits side. In recent budgets, we've said this is our goal on benefits, for example, and we've kind of taken that as a condition in the budget, and we've released the staffing workbooks in February, and then we've had this kind of budget cliffhanger in May, June. We want to try to change that process. We'd like to have much meatier and well-developed plans around these items before the end of the calendar year. So priority actions are on the operations work group for next month, and compensation is on for December. So we're trying to move ahead on that. And by doing so, we give the board more time to sift and sort and weigh before we lock in on any particular plan. That's kind of the idea. This is the 17-18 financial context as opposed to the strategic context. This is sort of where we're at for 17-18, big picture financials. Going backwards, 15-16 was that school year, financial results were right on target. And you'll get that audit report next month in November. That was really important because we needed that $1.6 million targeted surplus to help balance this year's budget for 16-17. So that worked out well, that 2-year strategy. Now turning to 17-18, first, we need a balanced budget. Jen already said it. We need a balanced budget because we have a policy that says we have to have a 10% fund balance, and we're right on the edge of it. Secondly, state budget next spring is unknown, but we also have 3 cycles of 2-year state budgets to look at and use as a way of predicting what's going to happen for the next 2-year, and we're going to rely on that. The trend in enrollment is going to reverse, we believe, from 2 years of decreases to a positive next year. We'll show you more on that in a second. And then for 17-18, the biggest consideration of all is this November 8th additional levy referendum. And that's because of this. This is essentially a really simple chart that shows the 16-17 school year up on top, this little table, and the next 3 years that will follow. And the middle column says percentage revenue growth without a referendum. This is our estimate of what the state funding formula will look like or result in for our school district. It's based on the previous 6-year pattern of minimal enrollment growth, and that is the logic. Minimal enrollment growth, use the tools of Act 10 to cut your costs. It's been in place for 6 years. We don't think that's going to change. And you've seen what it's doing here in Madison. We have 120 position reductions, among many other budget-cutting activities. The scenario on the right is the one that we propose, which we think is more responsible and more sustainable. It's a revenue growth that averages 2.74% per year over the next couple of years. And we all know what's at stake with that. So that decision will largely drive the 2017-18 budget process. And we'll know on November 8th at night.
I assume that if the recommendation for the budget votes this month will be levying to the max under both scenarios, under referendum passes, referendum doesn't pass scenario. Is that correct? I mean,
Yes.
is that a safe assumption?
Yes.
And in effect, levying to the max, and if the referendum pass, puts us at, was it $3.3 million surplus? I mean, we have a balanced budget, and that levy is the levy with the $5 million, and then minus the 1.6, so that's 3.4, and then there's some adjustments around 4K
Right.
and things like that. But let's call it 3.4, which we did last year. And we did it last year because we were anticipating very low revenue growth or no revenue growth this year, and we were correct in assuming that. I think we have to have a discussion of the strategy either now or at that meeting, or both, because if we do that under the assumption of a past referendum, we are looking at up there at 2.3% revenue growth. And if we're doing that off of a balanced budget, we're talking about a 4.3 or something like that revenue growth, if you include the surplus. And so I think we need to have a discussion of levying the $5 million for what is essentially a balanced budget. And I don't think this board has had that discussion. And I think before we take that vote in a week, we need to have it. And we can have it next week, or we can have it with 2 people missing. I don't think tonight's a good night to have it. 3 people, well, 2.5 people missing. But I do think, I just want to kind of like flag that out, that this is it's a strategy. It's a strategy that has its advantages. It's a strategy that also costs our taxpayers both this year and, depending on how the money's spent, perhaps in future years. And so, due to lost equalization aid, depending on how that money's spent. And I think that, again, I just think it's something that we just don't do. I think we need to decide to do it in a very deliberate way. And so that's why I'm flagging that right now.
I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're basically talking about that first year, 5 million, basically what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
that's what I'm talking about.
Whether or not we should actually levy that.
Or levy the entire amount, or, yeah. I mean, I think that the question is really, my guess is that I'm the person who's most reluctant to levy that and at this table, and I'm not reluctant to levy some of it. So I guess, so then the question becomes, should we levy the entire amount? And I think that that's something that we need. I do think, if other people don't agree, then I'll just make a little statement on Monday and we won't have a discussion. But I do think we need to have a my personal thing is we should discuss.
So you're talking about 16, 17, 5 million, and is that?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
16, 17, and 5 million. And the premise basically is that the budget is already balanced.
That's one piece of the premise, yeah. Yeah.
It seems to me that we're asking the voters to, well, we're out there telling people we want to have an additional $5 million in revenue authority this year. And if the voters pass that and we say, oh, never mind, we're not going to do that, I don't want to be the one trying to explain why we're not, after we've been out there making the case of how critical it is to get the referendum passed, so we'll be able to meet the budget challenges we're going to face next year.
Well, in the 2008 referendum, out of all the years since 2008, only 2 of those years has been levied to the max. So I think that there's a precedent here. And in fact, when I talk to people, one of the things when you talk about being fiscally responsible is that we haven't used all the levy every year. That we haven't used all the levy authority, and that when people say that you're just asking for a blank check, you say no. We've been very careful with our budgeting. In some years we've used the entire levy authority, in some years we haven't. And so I think that that there's a counter there that people seem to respect.
Okay.
I mean, we're asking for revenue authority. So.
I don't recall a situation where we've said we needed it, and then after they pass it, 2 weeks later say, oh, just kidding. And if we find in 2017-18 that we don't need to do it, then we, in that situation,
Well, we don't need it to balance this budget.
no, we don't, but it's part of the strategy that we've adopted in adopting to go to the referendum.
Yeah,
I
our
mean, I
strategy
can
would-
understand you
Yeah.
disagree with that, but that is in fact what we decided to do.
That was the strategy from the beginning. If you would just remind me, maybe the viewers as well, what the strategy was, because we didn't plan for
Yeah.
unbalanced.
So, our thinking around this was involved 3 or 4 major ideas. One, that the levy this year, including the 5 million, would be a 2.17 or now a 2.11% levy increase, which is, if you look at our trend in levy increases, the best year that we've had in several years. So we felt good about that. The second was around equalization aid, which TJ just mentioned. Equalization aid is not impacted when you levy. It's only when you spend, and we were not intending to spend. So we wanted to guard against that. Third, if you look at the balance sheet in the form of fund balance, it's taken a pounding over the last 7 or 8 years due to the overall situation in the state. And this would be a chance to strengthen the balance sheet just a bit. From right now it's right at its minimum policy level, 10%, and this would help in that regard. It would also help in that it would show some solid budget management and balance sheet management, which hopefully we can sustain over the next few years, so that if the district does have to go out in some future year for a capital borrowing, you'd have a bond rating that reflected those practices. So it's a combination of factors led us to say that we would approach it this way. I mean, I understand there's alternate views on that. I'm not disputing that. We felt this package made sense. So,
if we talk about what we've said to the public, and I think what we said to the public is very important. I've been through the referendum materials, and in no place in the referendum materials does it say that we want to levy money to build up our fund equity. Nowhere does it say that. And I understand the strategy, but when you talk about what we've said, we haven't said that to the public. We probably should have. Maybe it's too complex. Maybe we think it's too complex for the, I think that it's, in terms of transparency, it's a legitimate thing. I think that we should look at that. But it hasn't been what we've told the public.
We will take that feedback, TJ, in terms of communication on the referendum. I do know for a fact that we did have this strategy discussion with the board before the board voted to move forward on the structure of the referendum itself. So this should not be a new discussion for the board. We went through this thoroughly as we vetted the structure of the referendum itself. But I'll take that feedback in terms of communication and talk with our team.
Well, I just want to say, I agree with TJ about, building up the fund balance hasn't been what we're talking about in terms of the referendum. And the reason it isn't is because I don't view that as what we're doing. I view it as we're looking at a $12 million projected budget deficit next year, and we want to levy, get $5 million this year and an additional $5 million next year, which will give us the $10 million we need to address our budget challenges next year.
That is why we're doing what we're doing.
Well, I'm a
Okay.
little lost in between. Are you saying that with all this come together, we're gonna have a surplus at the end of this year, which is a good thing, that we apply for the next years like we're doing this year? Is that?
Yeah, we're banking $5 million this year to next year.
Or
That's the way I do it.
3.6 or whatever.
Whatever it is.
Right, so that's,
Exactly what we're doing.
okay.
Yeah, the
that's
first
my
5
understanding.
million is in it's really the budget we're approving. The first 5 million is actually in the budget that we already have.
Yeah.
That's
We'll
right.
be using it to
Yeah.
support us in
Yeah.
the next budget.
That's right.
That is
So it's
correct.
sort of a time frame. And that's, which one are we approving? It's too
Yeah,
many of
so,
them.
well,
15,
right,
16.
it's complex, one
Right.
of your board members
Yeah.
doesn't quite have a full handle on it yet, so how do we describe it, right, so
So
I think
15,
what I'm-
16, right?
I
That's the
think
first
I'm
5
okay
million.
with.
No, this
doing
year,
the
which
side.
is 16.
16, 17,
This year,
16, 17.
17.
Yeah,
First 5 million.
that's this one,
Yeah.
And so we'll go in, if the referendum passes, we'll go into the 16-17, having rebuilt our fund balance by approximately $3.5 million, and with $10 million in new revenue authority.
in the next couple of years.
And then.
No,
and
well, the 17-18 budget. Yeah,
That's right.
yeah. So so Ed said 10 million. In fact, we'll have $13.5 million to deal with that budget. 13.5 million more revenue, if you include the surplus, than we do this year.
I think it's a valid point to talk about, and
Yeah.
and the board can decide. So, I think it's a valid point,
Yeah.
something to discuss. So I don't think it's something we should just. I mean, I agree with your statement that we had it on the table, we talked about it. So, but
Some
I don't
things-
think it'd be harmful to
To
just
continue this
spend
discussion.
a few minutes on it and talk about it.
Mhm.
You certainly
Can and should revisit it. It's an important decision, every decision related to our budget is. But this was a thoroughly vetted decision that the board made, again, regarding the structure of the referendum. And this is not the time to call it into question, the structure of the referendum itself. And TJ, you made your remarks back
Yeah.
in August before we voted,
And at that time, one of the responses was that we can have the authority and not use it. And I am pointing to the fact that the decision to use this authority or not is coming up in a week. And we can have the authority and not use it. So we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So that's, as you can see, a number of issues surrounding 17-18. A lot of variables on the table. We know this. If we don't do something, we're going to face the same issues in 17-18 and 18-19 that we've faced in the last 2 years or the last 4 years. We're trying to get out of this cycle of repeated reductions of 1 to 2% staff, as we have been in for the last couple of years. This is the enrollment chart. We talked about this earlier. You can see the enrollment decreased in 15-16 and 16-17. That is a demographic trend that is far beyond the Madison Metropolitan School District. That is due to the number of births that occurred during the Great Recession, and that is a trend that now is expected to reverse. And based on the overall accuracy of the work that comes out of the research department, I think that we should start building our budget around that projected 17-18 enrollment picture. The strategic context for 17-18 is kind of the companion piece to the financial context.
That's right. And I think the strategic context, again, is highly dependent on our having the revenue necessary to make the kinds of decisions we want to make. But what we're going for is continuing to work towards leveraging those priority actions to make more progress, and specifically gap narrowing progress. As we spoke about in the board retreat recently, we want to be able to simultaneously maximize our strategy for full impact while simultaneously looking for opportunities to innovate and learn as an organization, especially in areas where there are no easy answers anywhere in education. We want to get out of the cycle that we're in when it comes to benefits and compensation. We are having to kind of each year figure out a short-term solution, and we are very interested in finding a long-term solution that really supports our educators in the way we want to support them. And then finally, we're eager to learn about how to design a better and better staffing process to help our school-based educators in particular make the best possible decisions for resource allocation. We are going to be moving from the Excel workbooks that we think are really clunky into a more web-based process this year, which is really about helping our principals and other school-based educators get more visibility into their own budgeting and their own and the opportunities that exist there. Ultimately, we want to push harder for more impact through the budgeting process this year. And I say that as we head into our discussion on guiding principles and goals in particular.
Yeah. So there were, as I said at the beginning, a couple of areas where we're looking for some board input, and guiding principles would be one. And I think just to highlight the point that Jen just made, these are the guiding principles that we developed for the 15-16 budget on the far left, 16-17 in the middle, 17-18 is under construction. We really want your reaction to that 17-18 column. But what you might notice if you look across is in 15-16, the guiding principles were somewhat defensive in posture. Keep cuts away, preserve priorities to the extent possible. In 16-17, the language is a bit more forward-leaning, where you see like sustain the focus and momentum of existing priority actions. And you see more targeted language around allocation of resources. We name gap narrowing in 16-17. 17-18, I think what we're looking for in the guiding principles is to be even more sort of forward-leaning. you see, for example, the second bullet, leverage priority actions to accelerate gap narrowing. So we've gone from keep cuts away to sustain to now leverage and accelerate. You know, it's just, I think it's just the confidence of our team and the momentum that we've built and the successful vibe that we've been trying to build. And that it's there, it shows up on the screen. And then the other is down at the bottom, support opportunities to innovate for organizational learning. Kind of the same orientation that let's both live in the present and do what we know is working, and let's live in the future a little bit too, with opportunities to innovate. So that's the progression that we see in the guiding principles, and we were looking for your reaction to those, not just the concept, but also the specific bullets. And can we pause here and take some reaction?
TJ?
I'm not clear where the benefit redesign lives in these priority actions. The benefit redesign, which is flagged on the previous slide, where this lives in the priority actions.
I think it might get a little sort of on goals. Are you looking at the?
I'm on developing guiding principles.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And I guess it could be allocate resources,
Right.
but if that's one of the three things that's flagged in the previous slide,
Yeah.
it seems like it should have a clear home in the guiding principles, that there's something that should be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we discussed it. We felt like the guiding principles are about how we approach the budget work. And we tended not to name any specific, something as specific as the employee benefit plan. But we're here for input. So let us take these notes down, and we'll think about ways of incorporating these ideas.
Yeah, but it might be something more along the lines of thinking about long-term stability, supportive environment for staff, right? Like, the benefits redesign is part of that. But that we should always have an eye towards improving student achievement, student outcomes, and supporting our staff. I don't know. I get where you're going, TJ.
Yeah. And I guess it's kind of, I mean, when you talk about things, principles, how umbrella and how general do you want them to be, and how specific? Because there are things like organizational learning kind of gets in there, like it's on both ones, and it probably appears on the goal on the next page too. I'm not sure. And so I don't know. I mean, it's semantic, but it's just something that kind of flagged out. And I'll just say that. And you can say somewhere, the number one, allocate resources for greatest impact on students, raising achievement and narrowing gaps, is one of those ones where it's an umbrella that takes in or covers up both the budgeting process and the allocation processes and the prioritization of program evaluation and expansion of things that work and things like that. So, I mean, that's a big umbrella, and I see that. And I guess that if we and I guess that's why they're principles. So.
Yep.
May I move on?
I think so.
Guiding principles are followed by budget goals. And so the budget goals are perhaps more tangible than our guiding principles. These are the things that we are intent on delivering upon. And you can see as you look from 15, 16 on, a certain sharpening of focus, and again, more sort of active voice, or more sort of forward-leaning voice. Take, for example, support recruitment, selection, and retention of high-quality staff. That was a big focus in 16, 17, as opposed to promote, just more active, more ambitious, I guess I would say. The evolution of equitable use of resources from just a fragment to something we can actually deliver on, demonstrating equitable use of resources to support school with highest needs, much sharper, much more measurable goal. Transparency, that has evolved from 15-16, where the definition was create a budget book that was readable, that had a narrative, that had a narrative quality to it. We told a story from beginning to end, and that we don't want to lose that. But transparency, it seems, has evolved to not just budget presentation, but being able to demonstrate to the board and the community that this is exactly how the decisions were made. These are the values that drove them. We've made some strides here. You've seen the equitable distribution of staffing chart, but that's just one step. We know that we can take multiple additional steps, and that's what this is getting at. So that's the evolution of the goals. Goals should not change radically year to year. All right, we are focused here on a certain way of doing business. So what you see here are refinements and more emphasis, and
Maybe with some more specificity than the
yeah.
previous years.
The last one on the bottom of the page is something I really wanted to highlight, where it says more time for strategic pre-decisional input by the board and the community. And tonight, this discussion is an early example of what we'd like to do every month. As you know, the budget dominoes fall very quickly. Once you decide on compensation and benefits, you have sort of made a decision about staffing, or vice versa. And we want to make sure that we use this time from October to the end of the calendar year to go have multiple rounds of discussions about how those things fit together and where the points of emphasis are. Right? Is your emphasis to maintain, these are examples. Our goal is that we will have exactly the same, we will not have a single reduction in staff as a goal. It's an example goal. It drives a lot of other things then. You have then made commitments that will impact compensation and benefits. You could say, we do not want to revisit benefits. Okay, that will have impacts in other areas. We want to give the board an opportunity to work with those variables before they get locked in. And that has to happen in the fall. So that's what that's all about. Legitimate pre-decisional input that will drive this budget process.
So should we pause that?
Yeah, that's a pause.
Okay.
That's a long pause.
Well,
James?
one of the areas that the board wanted to have pre-decisional input into is so that when we get to this amendment process, that it can really be minimal to non-existent, is the area of priority actions. And so board members, you all really talked about having input in that. I just want to say that to remind you of that, because I haven't been hearing much about priority actions, and this is a very strong point the board made, was that they wanted more input on these priority actions so that when we get down the road, so that we don't have to come back and try to make corrections with amendments and all. So I just want to put that on the table. That's where the board was, and I haven't been hearing much from the board on these priority actions, so I just want to remind us that that's a huge part of this pre-decisional input. So let's remember that's something that we stated. So.
Which
Months ago.
TJ?
I just want to thank you for the bottom 3 bullet points on the right. The demonstrate equitable use, improve transparency, and begin budget development at those. So.
Okay,
we will pass that back to SLT.
Yeah.
They
So-
created these. Okay, that brings us to priority actions. Thank you.
So, as you know, the building of the priority actions have been an integral part of our budgeting process. And in the past, the way that has kind of worked is that our senior leadership team has sat down together and taken a look at the strategies to continue the momentum and accelerate gap narrowing work out in the buildings. So this year, we want to take a bit of a different approach, and rather than us coming to you right away, we wanted to hear from you around some strategic priority actions based on a prompt that will come up here in the next couple of slides. But wanted to get and be sure that we reviewed what we've done over the last couple of years and how our priority actions look, and really just review for ourselves where we were over the last couple of years. So these were the 15, 16 priority actions that are listed. It's interesting to note that the priority actions on the next two slides do have a thread that pulls between the two of them around our major plans that we brought in front of the board and the work that we're doing. So you'll see priority actions around the technology plan. You'll see it around the ELL plan. Moving forward, you'll see it around pathways within the next two slides that are here. You'll also see some strategies and actions that we have gotten really great traction around. The quarterly release for K2 in 15-16, and then in 16-17, you'll see that we push that out along with our middle schools. So some of the things that worked the first year, we expanded into the second year. So these were our last 2 years worth of priority actions moving forward, and I'll give you just a minute to take a look at those. So 15-16 and 16-17. So moving into 17-18, wanted to, rather than us bringing something to you, wanted to get some of your thoughts around what strategic priority actions do you believe will significantly accelerate momentum towards achieving our framework goals. And these are the areas in our framework, just as a reminder for you to be thinking about. So teaching and learning. Oh, this is nicely populated, Mike, one at a time. Professional development, compensation strategy, enrollment strategy, around operations, and around a staffing model moving forward. And then, of course, some opportunities that we talked a little bit about at the board retreat, but want to know what your thinking is around that. So wanted to just take a minute and have you think about that question in the areas that are there moving forward for priority actions, and get some of your input early so that we can go back as an SLT and then come back in November with some information about that to discuss again. So the next 2 months, we want to really hit this.
Emphasize this is early
Yep.
input, not the
You
only
bet.
input.
You bet. What do you want us to have on our radar as we're putting together the initial approach that we'll present to you a month from now?
What does enrollment strategy mean?
This is actually some feedback that we got from Mary Burke, wanting us to think more proactively about ways to increase enrollment. Yeah. So what would that look like? We want to get more proactive. So.
Yeah, but I appreciate the pause here, and I think Ed's question highlight probably a little bit of difficulty at this point. I think plus and minuses is that it gets us to start thinking about these. And the minuses is that maybe having a little more information about maybe what some of the thinking is will help us think about it a little more. And so I think it's a good thing.
We know that all of our ideas, including the board's ideas, will become more well-formed over time, but as you think about the progress we've made as a district, the areas of continued challenge that we face as a district, what are the areas that bubble up for you that you want us to be paying really close attention to as we launch the budget process?
And I also think that to revisit some of the past details of the priority action may be helpful to the board to think about you know, what we need to think about moving forward, because when we talk about these priority actions, there's a lot more detail there, there's cost involved, and so maybe if the board could refresh its memory on what some of the details of these priority actions were last year, to help them think about maybe what they might, how to think about making suggestions for 17, 18, 16, 17.
One thing we can do is in the weekly update, potentially just send those out as a reminder. I mean, they all can be found in the budget book, but just so it's all in one place, and give you this window of time between now and the next time we meet.
So they're in the budget book.
They are.
So, yeah, you can just,
Just
suggest
flag
them.
them for you. Yeah, so it's easy to find.
But I think a multi-year perspective on the priority actions is good, because some of these do carry over from 14, 15 to 15, 16, and the budgets have changed on them, the details have changed on them, and I think that one of the questions I had is, when does something stop being a priority action and simply become part of the budget? And so I think that when we talk about priority actions, kind of that kind of historical, and that, you know what, this is just now what we're doing, and it's moved over to the secondary education budget line, and it's no longer a priority action, those kind of things. And some of them have always kind of had that kind of uncomfortable position where they were, well, we're doing this anyway, but it's just, we want to highlight it for so you're all aware of it, kind of thing. And so I think that James is right, that kind of looking at those from those perspectives. In terms of, in addition, the one thing is that the development of allocations and allocations processes around general staffing and Title I staffing and decision-making around that stuff is to me, and I think that it's kind of buried in here a little bit, but that's something that to me is really important and continues to be important. In terms of kind of programmatic things, I'm glad to see that we're looking into 4K evaluation. I think that 4K it needs our attention, and I think that attention will have budgetary implications beyond. Looking at the reports from our major tutoring programs this week, continued work around tutoring and professional development for our partners and for our own people, better integration into our schools. I've got some questions that I haven't had a chance to write up about student selection and where we're at on that on the tutoring programs, but clearly we have a lot more to go, and how to leverage that. And then the third one is that I think that, and this is a huge category, but MTSS, and especially around differentiation and within the whatever person, the general classroom, but also for those who are struggling and falling further and further behind, what kind of strategies, what kind of things we're doing there to boost that up, because I think that's still, that those where the gaps need to be addressed is within the MTSS system. I mean, this is the system that we use, the multi-tiered systems of support, and when students are not learning in the ways and at the rates that will allow them to keep pace, those students have to be our number one priority. And I think that close examination of the MTSS system, who is being treated in which ways and what we're doing with it, what kind of supports are needed that we're not providing, what kind of supports do we have that are working. I think we've had a couple of things in the last couple of years that we've had some success with. Will that plateau out? Those kind of things. And I really think that that to me, my priority is always, my number one priority is the students who are falling behind. I mean, that's just got to be it. And regardless of that's got to be it. So.
We are considering on Monday adopting the special education plan, which calls for some additional positions and expenditures. So I assume that would have to be a priority. We're having an evaluation of our advanced learning program and getting some recommendations or conclusions in January, I guess. And I would assume that may have some financial impacts, potential impacts attached to it. I agree that it would be good to set a long-term strategy regarding compensation and benefits, which salary and benefits, which I see as two sides of the coin, the compensation coin. Given the time frame we're going to be on, I don't see how we can do anything significant about that for purposes of this budget. But at some point, we've got to sit down with our teachers and other staff and talk about, are we doing this the right way, or is there a better way to structure, the whole overall compensation system? And that's obviously a big undertaking and I don't know how long it will take, but at some point, we got to do it and make use of that compensation study. And it's the same thing with staffing models. I don't think that we have enough time to really do anything significant on that, other than, making changes around the edges, around the margins. But, the compensation study says that we have a lower teacher-to-student ratio than other districts, but the people who are actually doing the work perceive it as being understaffed, and why is that? And can we, is it a different way of structuring it? I mean, that's another big issue to take on, but again, we're not going to be able to do that in the next few months. But we got to do it at some point. So I don't know, when do we say, we're going to undertake these big questions outside of the regular budget cycle so we can really dig into it? I don't know.
Can I make a comment on that real quick, Ed? I want to make sure that the board is reminded that we are putting together, I think it actually is getting launched this month in October, kind of a staff work group to really consume the compensation study recommendations. MTI is a part of that work group, because we do need to figure out kind of how we want to phase those recommendations, which ones we're going to take on, and how we're going to phase those in over time. And it is on deck for the board to look at that sometime this fall. I can't remember. I don't know that we've landed on the exact spot. But definitely agree that we want to make some strides in this budget, but we need to determine what our long-term plan is.
And then big opportunities, we need to hear from you on that, I think. I mean, we're not going to come up with those. Maybe you.
Teen's got the solar panels.
Yeah, there you go.
Some of our sharp kids build a nuclear reactor in the basement, power everything.
Anyone else have thoughts? All right.
So what we'll do is compile in kind of an easy-to-access list of what the previous priority actions have been. I totally get why you would want to see that. It'll prompt some thinking about the future. And at our next meeting, we will be going over, we'll be sharing our best thinking on priority actions, including whatever ideas you've submitted to us in the meantime, between now and then, which will bring us to calendar.
Which
So
is
Mike
really our last piece.
Yeah, which is
this
our very
evening.
last piece. So Mike is going to pass this around. We have a much more aggressive budget calendar than in previous years. And we're excited that we're in a position to actually move this quickly.
Another big piece of paper.
Yeah, I don't know where we're supposed to put all these.
Right.
Just one. There's multiple copies. So this is a familiar document, at least as to format. We've used this last year in a simpler version the year before. I wanted to emphasize that this is a draft, and I wanted to focus on the board piece of this work. There are extras. Lots of extras on the table if anybody needs one. So it's a draft, and we want to focus on the board band of this work. And again, as we've done with other items, solicit your input. Not just tonight, but we'll leave this open for a while so that we can bring this calendar back next month and lock in on it. So focusing on the board's work or role in this process, beginning in October. Our intent here was to preview the board or the budget goals, the guiding principles, getting some early input on strategic priority actions, and get this calendar in front of you. So that's kind of a simple jumping off point, and that's what most of this has been tonight. November, I'm just going to highlight the items in bold. You don't need me to read this calendar to you. But November, lead with strategic priority action. It's on our team, working with the board to advance that strategic action work. And that's what we'll lead with. You'll also see that...
I can't leave because they'll destroy the quorum.
Oh, no.
Is Mike here?
I'm okay. I'll soldier through.
This meeting will never adjourn?
Pardon?
This meeting's never gonna adjourn? Wait, there's 4 of us.
Well, thank you.
That's quorum.
I'm fine. I'm good.
Quorum.
In 25 years of doing budget work, that was the most selfless act I have ever seen. And I want to thank you for that. Okay. So in November, priority actions, and then we start the public input immediately after this November 8th referendum. December, employee benefits and total compensation. These are all the big pieces. January, the staffing plan, because as you know, in February, we actually put that into motion, and we want to do it once, and we want to do it right. So that array from November, December, January, those are discussions that we can have in depth that the prior calendar didn't really allow for. That's really what we think is the big gain in this calendar. From February through March, we're doing final adjustments, refinements, report outs, making sure that all the pieces fit together, and then obviously we'll present the budget to you in April as we have always done, and look for adoption in June. So this is our draft, and wanted to preview it and ask for your input tonight, or we'll leave that opportunity open all the way until next operations work group in November. Okay.
A suggestion I have is adding another row for public input opportunities, just kind of break that out as a separate.
Okay.
Break it out.
Do I understand correctly that the assumptions that are previewed at the December on compensation and benefits will be the ones to inform all subsequent work, because it doesn't seem to come back? And I understand you kind of highlighted that
There
before.
isn't.
And I guess that, do you feel comfortable that your team can have, and Deirdre's team can have that in place by December? I mean, I think that's...
Sure. So don't assume that it's not coming back. It's
Okay.
just that won't be the lead item.
All right.
Obviously, a lot of these are going to have follow-up. And we do have great confidence that there will be a substantially interesting and meaty discussion on this topic in December. We've already been out challenging all 3 of the HMOs to think deeply about how they can better serve our school district, either as a continued 3-part system, or a 2, or even a 1, and what the implications of that are. We're really trying to think more boldly about benefit design, and what's going to happen between now and December is more time to talk with Doug Keeler and his team, more time to talk internally, and obviously more time for the HMOs to craft some proposals.
Are multi-year contracts going to be on the table?
Yes.
Good. That's one way to get away from this annual thing, and also that it could
right.
produce some savings.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
Thank you to everyone. We'll, we'll follow up accordingly and look forward to a more in-depth discussion in November.
Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, Amaya?
Aye.
All in favor, aye? We're adjourned.